I'm going to talk really fast because I don't want this guy interrupting me. I propose as a topic for next year a conference on the use of music for law enforcement purposes. Some years ago, Jacques Derrida, the leader of those post-structuralist, textualist, representationalists that Trevor was mentioning this morning, was explaining to a pair of interviewers that he was interested not only in taking things apart, in deconstructing or criticizing them, but also in affirming the possibility of new forms, of alternatives, of unexpected things to come. And he continued, even that was not enough, and here's a little quotation. One must not be content with affirmation. One needs position. That is, one must create institutions. One needs a stance. Of course, institutionalization in its very success threatens the movement of unconditional affirmation. And yet this needs to happen. For if the affirmation were content to, how shall I say it, to wash its hands of the institution in order to remain at a distance, in order to say, I affirm, and then the rest is of no interest to me, the institution does not interest me, let others take care of that, then the affirmation would deny itself. It would not be an affirmation. Any affirmation, any promise in its very structure requires its fulfillment. Affirmation requires a position. It requires that one move to action and that one has to do something, even if it is imperfect, unquote. This summer, Carlos Guerra and I tried to organize and analyze some instances of this necessity, embodied in a set of practices in an exhibition at a space he directs in Barcelona, La Verena, Center for the Image. I'll show you just some random images from it here. We were interested in what we called, for lack of a better word, and so borrowing one from Alan Sekula, anti-photojournalism. How have the multiple critiques of the institution of photojournalism affected, from within and without, the kinds of images we can make and see today of events in our world? What is happening to this particular institution? Lament for a Dying Field, Photojournalism, read the headline in the New York Times on August 9th last year, and the paper of record was not the inventor of that trope. It is now commonplace to suggest that photojournalism is dying. Sometimes this is said with profound regret, sometimes with relief, and sometimes it's denied. But the question of the future of news photography is almost always posed in the mode of life or death, as if the only options, after the critiques and the economic and political pressures, are photojournalism as we have known it, or nothing, blindness, confusion, no witnesses. This seems manifestly incorrect, and so we set out to see what else was happening. How have the critiques of the institution, the affirmations of other possibilities, taken shape and form in other practices? Photojournalism is a quiet, almost invisible institution of enormous power. All the talk about its death merely conceals its omnipresence, and in particular, its privileged relation to truth-telling about contemporary political reality. We asked our viewers to suspend for a moment the faith they had in photojournalism in its traditional and institutional form, and indulge the possibility that there were other ways of doing something like it. After all, nothing could be more important than to criticize it, to affirm the possibility of something different. Across a wide spectrum of work, from artists like Phil Collins and Hito Steli, to self-critical journalists like Gilles Perez and Paul Lowe, to an extraordinary database of destroyed buildings compiled by the Palestinian Planning Ministry in the Gaza Strip, to jihadi videos and Google Maps of the Iranian Intifada, we argued that photojournalism is in the midst of a remarkable and singularly unexpected upheaval. New practices, strategies, viewpoints, techniques, and agents have undermined and radically transformed the institutions and the fundamental concepts of the field. A convulsion has occurred at once within the institution, the exhaustion of an old paradigm and its displacement by new ones, and from without, where new images and new kinds of images have ruined the absolute authority of the old ways. These critical approaches, at once ethical, political, social, aesthetic, theoretical, even epistemological, themselves have a history and a multiplicity of forms, which is what we presented in Barcelona. Classically, photojournalism has been governed by a number of tropes: the heroic figure of the photographer, the economy of access to the event, getting close enough, as Kappa famously said, the iconic image, the value of the real and its faithful representation in the picture, the ethics of independence and objectivity, the mission of reporting the truth and conveying it to a faraway public, and often a commitment to a sort of humanitarian advocacy, or at least a bearing witness to terrible events. Anti-photojournalism names for us a systematic critique of these cliches and a complex set of counterproposals. It names a profound and passionate fidelity to the image, too, an image unleashed from the demands of this tradition and freed to ask other questions, make other claims, tell other stories. And it testifies to the creation, the stance-taking of alternative practices which are not content to remain on some sideline, but are actively and intensively engaging in the field. It is this relation to the institution itself that was most fascinating to us about the material we gathered. It resisted the all-or-nothing, life-or-death proposition altogether. It took the critical gesture, the affirmation of other possibilities, and acted to fulfill that promise. Hands were not washed. On the contrary, hands were dirty, engaged, making pictures, taking risks, and creating, as we speak and watch, another way of experiencing the world. Thank you.